Hello and welcome to Headlines. Whilst Iran's relations with the outside world and its influence and connections in the Middle East, usually in the global media spotlight, this country's internal dynamics and the circumstances involving its ethnic minorities are given extensive coverage only due to national elections and internal protests. A recently published report by Human Rights Watch claims that Iranian authorities have issued heavy prison sentences for at least 24 activists belonging to the country's Azerbaijani minority, without showing any credible evidence to substantiate charges made. What is referred to by the group as harsh prison sentences for 10 ethnic Azerbaijani activists, initially issued by Branch 15 of the Tehran's Islamic Revolutionary Court, have been later upheld by the Court of Appeal. While sentences issued range from 3 to 14 years, the charges on the basis of which these verdicts have been made include propaganda against the state, assembly and collusion with the intent to act against national security, and espionage. Human Rights Watch report claims that Iranian authorities did not present any evidence to back the charges against the accused, primarily citing their past activism on issues like environmental concerns and their role in advocating for the civil rights of Iran's ethnic groups. Today I'm joined by Professor Brenda Schaefer, US Naval Postgraduate School. She's joining us from Montreal, California, and Professor Schaefer is an author of a very influential work known as Iran is More Than Persia, Ethnic Politics in the Islamic Republic. Professor Schaefer, great delight to welcome you.
Thank you.
Professor, you are familiar with this report, I imagine. Are you surprised by its content? It seems to suggest that Iranian authorities, as part of a broader effort to silence dissent amongst ethnic minorities, have issued excessively harsh sentences for members of the country's Azerbaijani minority over the past few months. What is the degree of veracity that you would attribute to this report and the claim it makes?
Right, so I think Tehran's policies towards the ethnic minorities right now is really telling about how severely the regime sees the threat from ethnic minorities. So Iran is at one of its weakest points in 40 years. Its proxies are decimated, which were its main defense strategy. Its air defense is decimated. Its economy is in tatters, and most important is an energy crisis that basically cannot keep the lights and heat on in about half of the country. So in response to this systemic crisis, the regime is doing both carrots and sticks. On one hand, some sort of reduction of implementation of difficult laws like the hijab law, or yesterday when there was a killing in Tehran University, right away sending in investigators and trying to depoliticize it. On the other hand, cracking down very hard, extremely hard, on the ethnic minorities, meaning that they feel the women's issues, the sort of general political issues, they can handle through carrots, but with the ethnic minorities, they're using just sticks.
Professor, this report makes a particular reference to the sensibility revolving around Lake Urmia. What is the nature of this sensibility? Because quite often the report is saying that on the basis of informed source, they're given to understand that some of those Azerbaijani activists have been imprisoned and then later sentenced due to their environmental activism related to that lake. What is the sensibility revolving around that issue?
Right. So Lake Urmia is one of the world's largest inland seas, and it's a special environmental system in terms of birds and flora and all sorts of animals and people that live near the sea. And in the last 30 years, there's been a huge retreat of the sea. It's been very rapid in the last 15 years. And that has made it very difficult for communities, mostly ethnic Azerbaijanis, to live near the sea. It's made all sorts of towns and villages. People have had to leave their native lands, and also health issues in terms of like salt storms and other environmental damage because of the retreating sea. Many ethnic Azerbaijanis in Iran see this policy as purposeful from Tehran in order to cause an immigration of ethnic Azerbaijanis from the region. But certainly, it's the state of the lake is a indication of the poor management of Iran. You know, it's very similar to like the energy crisis in Iran. Iran sits on the second largest natural gas volumes in the world. There's no reason that Iran shouldn't have cheap, stable, efficient heat, electricity, gasoline, everything to power an economy. But somehow, due to corruption, due to a lot of smuggling, because the goods are very subsidized and cheap in Iran, so smuggling them outside of Iran, that they have a situation where the second biggest natural gas holder in the world can't keep the lights on.
Professor, it quite often has been said that Azerbaijanis constitute Iran's largest ethnic minority, and they're quite influential. They're well integrated into Iranian society. Even the Iranian current president, is of Azerbaijani origin. If Azerbaijanis are so well integrated into Iranian society, why should there be a need for what the Human Rights Watch and other organizations refer to as this form of suppression?
Right. So first thing, identity is dynamic, right? So if you were to say, what were ethnic trends 50 years ago, 100 years ago, they develop, and especially in our world of communications, like your own news channel that is accessed in Iran, is accessed all over the world, internet, there is a identity sort of rejuvenation in the world of people that were cut off from their co-ethnics. And I think especially after the victory of Azerbaijan in the 2020 war with Armenia, liberating its territories from occupation, very successful military. I think this was sort of an awakening for ethnic Azerbaijanis in Iran. And it's not by chance that Iran has held, multiple threatening military drills on Azerbaijan's border. It's not by chance that the Iranian regime allowed or maybe sanctioned even an attack on the Azerbaijani embassy in Tehran. It's clear that they're very frightened by the rise of a Republic of Azerbaijan and it's this very prosperous period for Azerbaijan, and that's why you're seeing again some leeways with issues like hijab and women, and at the same time crackdown on the ethnic minorities.
Professor, you're the author of the very influential book entitled Iran is More Than Persia. Could you walk us through this fundamental structure defining Iranian national identity? What are the key parameters of conceptualization of the notion known as Iranian people, and where the Azerbaijanis do find themselves within that construct?
Right. So for most of its history, and especially modern history, Iran was ruled by Turkic dynasties, Safavids, Qajars. And this way you are correct when you say, well, if they are such a large group in Iran, why would they need, they are Iran in a sense, a separate identity. But Iran today is ruled not only by the Islamic Republic, but by a smaller group of Persians that are only about 37% of the population of Iran, that don't allow any schools, cultural rights, rights to use language in government forms. So it no longer is an Iran of all the peoples of Iran, but it is Iran that only serves the interests of the Persian cultural group. And we even see this, by the way, going back to the energy crisis. The center of Iran still gets to enjoy clean, non-polluting natural gas, while in the peripheries, people are struggling from the use of mazout, heavy fuel, while there's this natural gas crisis, meaning there's an energy apartheid going on in Iran as well. In this era where, for instance, people in Iran can access television from Turkey and hear their language and see Turkish culture. They can access television from Azerbaijan, like your channel. People aren't willing to accept to be second-class citizens and not to have cultural rights. Even in Iran, ethnic minorities have difficulties registering the names of their children and their own names. Even the famous there was a symbol of women. Her real name isn't Masa. This was a Persian name she had to use in her passport.
Professor, we hear quite a lot about Iran in the international media when it comes to its relations, its strained relations with Israel, if we may refer to them as relations, some other issues related to the Middle East, to organizations like Hamas and so forth. But we do not hear about Iran's internal dynamics on a regular basis. And you talked about assimilation of ethnic minorities in Iran. If assuming on the basis of the presumption that we hear very little about those ethnic minorities, would it be judicious of us to conclude that Iran, to a large extent, has been successful in terms of its assimilation policies? Because people do not really know much about the circumstances involving Azerbaijanis worldwide.
Listen, before the breakup of the Soviet Union, a lot of people referred to the peoples in the Soviet Union as the Russians. Do you remember the famous book about the Soviet Union, the Russians, authored by New York Times correspondent in Moscow, Heinrich Smith? So often until actually there is freedom and openness, you understand the real levels of identity and language issue. I think Azerbaijan is a very good example where many outside researchers thought that, oh, these people are so Russified, they all speak Russian, and they didn't realize that they at home were speaking Azerbaijani, and very quickly after independence, the languages in Azerbaijan returned. We're even seeing a renaissance of language return in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia, even that was even more Russified with their native languages returning. And this is, I think, part of it that it's kind of surprised. Human Rights Watch in the 90s used to report about ethnic identities. Then most of the people who are ethnic issues in Iran. Then for about 15 years, they stopped reporting. Mostly the officers working on Iran were from Iran themselves and had some of the same chauvinism as the regime does itself. And you didn't hear as much. So I think this report is unique, not because the situation for ethnic minorities has necessarily gotten so much worse, but actually that some people in the West are willing to be open and to report about it. Too often, sort of Persian ideology has dominated the reporting as well on ethnic minorities. Surprisingly, one of the only organizations, UN Human Rights Council, actually has pretty consistently reported about the violations of human rights of ethnic minorities in Iran, always pointing out the most exceptional amounts of executions, exceptions amounts of judicial detentions, and of course just a systemic lack of cultural rights, language rights for ethnic minorities in Iran.
Professor, I'm very grateful to you for your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
This was Professor Brenda Schaefer from US Naval Postgraduate School. She joined us from California. See you very soon.